welcome to In the Rising, a health and wellness podcast for those going through and those supporting those going through cancer. My name is Bettina Brown, and I'm board certified in physical therapy, wound care, and lymphedema. And for me, cancer is very personal. It's affected my friends, my immediate, and my not so immediate family. And therefore, I created this podcast and fitafterbreastcancer.com to address the multiple dimensions of our lives during and after recovery. Jesus loves movies. Is that the first thing that you would think about when you're going through grief about what can help you move through things? Movies. And what about looking at how Jesus would interpret a movie, how he would have experienced it? So obviously from the title of this podcast and from what I've just said, if anything faith related is something that is not of interest for you, then this podcast episode is not going to be the one for you. But for everyone else, I was really excited to speak with my guest, Phil Strangolagali, who used movies to help himself and decided to write about it and write a devotional of how movies can help others. So I'm really thrilled that you're here and to listen to our conversation.
Phil, I am excited to speak with you today because you're the author of Jesus Loves Movies, a 30-day devotional for film fans. I was already at Jesus Loves Movies. I was like, yes, he does. And what you're using are movies to help you out in life. And I want to go into that, but I also want to just tell you that I am excited that you're an author because a lot of people, I don't know what the statistics are, 90 some people want to write a book, 3% do, less than that actually publish it. So to go out there, be vulnerable, put your name on something takes a huge risk. And I just want to acknowledge that first and foremost.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it was definitely a vulnerable process. Felt like my heart was out there for everybody to see. And it still sometimes feels like that. So.
Yes. So you are a film fanatic.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Love your films. Mm-hmm. What made you decide to use
a movie reference for a topic?
Such as like a devotional? Where did that?
Yeah, so that really came from some deep trauma that I went through back in 2017. I had a lot taken from me in my life, a lot of plans that I had. I was engaged at the time and, we're married now, my wife and I, which is really awesome. But the moments leading up to that and being engaged, there were all these plans that came with that. And, I had a really great job, had like a lot of plans, a lot of really great things were happening. It felt like nothing was stopping me. And then all of a sudden, something happened, traumatic, wrong. And, there were a lot of those scenarios that happened. And I felt like a lot was taken from me in my life. I felt like, here I was, I had trained so hard to get where I wanted to be. And, eventually I was, with this specific job, with this specific company. And, these guys, they wanted me to lie. They wanted me to lie on, all their activity and what they were doing, because if we lied, we would keep our jobs and we would show that, we needed more money in order to, continue on and really keep our jobs. So I didn't want to lie. I didn't want to do any of that stuff. And, I got a lot of pressure and like a lot of name calls, a lot of that stuff. And it was really tough because, here I am, I'm feeling bright and shiny and ready to go and ready for the world and ready. This is about 2 years after I finished college, to have all that taken from me in a really unjust way. It was really tough. I was at a really low place in 2017, a really, really low place in my life where I felt like I had no purpose and, that there was no meaning. And honestly, like I like to think of my 2017 as a lot of what 2020 felt like for, a lot of us, and that's really what 2017 felt like. It felt like I was exiled. I was away from everything. I felt isolated. And I started watching movies. I started watching movies. I've always watched movies. I've always loved movies, but There was a specific movie that I watched, The Count of Monte Cristo, came out in 2002, but obviously there have been so many iterations of that story. So that story is a very well-known story. And, it really struck me. I really thought that this guy, Edmond Dantes, in the story, it just spoke to me. I felt like I was in his shoes. I felt like, because, he had everything going well in his life. He was engaged, ready to be married. He was promoted. He had all these things going on in his life. And then all of a sudden, one of his friends gets really close, gets really jealous, and falsely accuses him of doing something wrong, sends him to a prison island, the Chateau d'If. And honestly, I felt like that. I watched that movie, like, no joke, no lie, 3 times in a row. And I started writing, and I was crying and writing, realizing that movies were a safe space for me to go. And so that's where I went. I started watching movies, and I started feeling like a connection between these movies and my life. And honestly, this whole journey, this whole book, it was a grief journal. It was a grief journal for one of my, toughest times in my life. And, I never planned on it becoming a book, but it did become a book.
And with that, I think a lot of us, if someone talks that way about music, we're like, oh yeah, like those are my sad songs. Those are my breakup songs. These are my happy songs. And a lot of us, we don't think, or in our conversation, don't automatically go to movies. But movies pull you in. Those are, you identify with characters, you get mad at characters because they represent something you like, or you see in yourself, or see in someone else or situation. You wrote this grief journal. You're writing, you're pulling this out. When did you think, what other movies can I go to after The Count of Monte Cristo? How did that path kind of develop for you?
It was really a path of, like, honestly watching films and kind of having, like, different eyes to where I was like, how did Edmund feel? I felt like the way Edmund felt in this specific situation. And then I went back to a movie that I watched when I was a little kid, and that was Toy Story. And honestly, I felt like Woody in a toy chest. That moment when Andy says, I don't want to play with you anymore. A Buzz is my shiny new toy. And, without going in specifics, to the specific situation that I went through, I felt rejected. I felt not wanted. And how many of us have felt rejected? How many of us have felt not wanted? And, what's the relation to that? What's the relation to that spiritually? And, I'm a faith-based guy, and I believe Jesus, he was rejected. And if there's anybody that knows what it's like to be rejected, it's him. And, I started really connecting on that deep level, and, it was tough, but, it was a lot of drawing out from those films. And, there are a lot of films, like, especially, even the children's films, that really shine a light on a lot of these issues, like rejection and acceptance.
And I heard a pastor say one time, if you ever feel rejected, know you're in good company. So there is that. And with that too, you're a faith-based guy. For your own situation, have you always been fairly strong with your faith, or was that something you pulled back up because of this low in your life?
No, yeah. When I was 16 years old, that was when I really committed my life, to God, and that was when I went through, something in which I prayed a real prayer, and I was like, God, if you're real, show me that you're real. I plugged myself in everywhere. I tried to find, any sort of information I could, about what I was doing, and, what I was following, and, all this stuff, and who I was following. And it was a journey for sure. And then I went to Nyack College, which really set the tone for, the foundation, of my life, honestly. And, I took classes. I took this one class, personal spiritual formation. It was literally about dealing with your junk in your life and, like, learning to walk with that, and, like, learning to move through that. And that's kind of where this sort of exercise of, the grief journal came from. And, I took a lot of those principles and kind of enacted it out, in life. And yeah.
Yeah. And so, you got to this place. A lot of us make big changes, and you hear it from different people. It's in the lows of their life that changes their life, that then leads them to make and help others make changes as well. Looking back from that rejection and how you felt grief, we don't need to go to specifics, but we can all relate to some episodes in life like that.
Yeah.
What do you feel was like one trigger that really helped transition you to where you are now?
I'll be completely honest with you. I'm still doing, I'm still going to counseling or, all that stuff. I believe in counseling. I believe, that people should be taking care of their mental health. In 2017, when everything was really fresh for me and the wound was really open, wide, it was difficult for me to deal with. I would see cars, I would see people, I would see certain things, and it would just set me off. And it was a process of me forgiving these people that wronged me and realizing that I needed to move forward and that I needed to continue to forgive and bless and love. And it was just so countercultural and something I was always practicing for. And then this was game time, and I needed to do it. And, I still do it. I still do it today. And, it's gotten way easier, the process. And yeah, it's definitely gotten way easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like how you mentioned we all need to adjust and pay attention to our mental health. Like we're all about fitness, but we also have this emotional well-being. And for those of us that believe in our faith, a faith well-being as well. So you're this author, you're Jesus Loves Movies. How did you pick these movies? Like, where did this come from? Was this part of your grief journal? You're like, I saw this movie.
It honestly was. It was a process in which, I was watching movies during that period of time. And I started realizing that there were deeper messages, and there were messages that were speaking right to me right in that season. And, I watched, and then I also rewatched some films. And yeah, I just kept doing that. And, it was definitely a process, in terms of, I guess I wouldn't say like figuring out the movies. But it was definitely like, these are the movies that I needed to add, if somebody else were to write a book sort of like this, and, people have, in certain ways. I have a friend, Kathleen Falsani. She's wrote The Dude Abides. Mark Pinsky, he wrote the Gospel According to Disney. And, I remember reaching out to them and, kind of asking about their process and what they, were going for. And, it was sort of a different approach for me. It didn't necessarily come from like this gigantic analysis approach, but like more of a philosophical and how can I use this to help my life? How can I use these messages to help my life? And it was definitely a process, especially, some people, when it was 2019 and, I went to Georgia, I had the amazing opportunity to go to Georgia and do like a whole bunch of book signings. And it was definitely a process when, people would pick up my book and they would turn the book around and then they would see the H word. And that's the genre that you don't talk about, so to speak, in the church. And that's the horror genre. I put some horror films in there because I really connected with horror films. I went through horror in my life and I connected with horror films because, if there's anybody that understands horror, more than us, it's Jesus. I mean, he went through the worst horror that anybody's ever gone through. And that's kind of where I came from. And it was a lot of that process. And
And you said here too, that you've received emails, letters saying how, people say this book impacted me. It changed how I feel.
Yeah.
What does that make you feel about your experience and writing this down? How do you process when you receive words like that?
It helps me feel. I remember when I wrote this and, when I was about to publish the book, I was like, listen, if this impacts one person's life, it's done its job. Like, it's impacted me. But when I got some of those letters, especially like letters that I never thought I would get letters from, like, whether it's, people that I really look up to, they sent me letters and all that. There was this one letter in particular that I got from a guy in Virginia, and he messaged me and he was like, "You helped me see why I love horror movies." And, he was like, "I went through horror in my life." And I think, it was that whole reality of helping people see that they weren't alone, and that there was hope in the midst of their, really terrible circumstances or really traumatic circumstances, and that there was hope in the midst of it. The book's not cookie cutter. It's not like a cookie cutter type of book. I've had people from all walks of life read it, not just faith-based background or anything. And they've taken lessons out of it and realized that they weren't alone. And if I was able to provide something like that for people to feel like they're not alone, I mean, it's done its job like tenfold.
Yeah. Yeah. So this place right now, you're still moving up, and my podcast is called In the Rising. And sometimes I like to ask people, where do you see yourself still rising up to with your work or your process?
Yeah. So I am super thankful because the end of 2019, came and that was when I did, my book signings over in Georgia. And then the year of 2020 came. I had 12 book signings for the year of 2020. We all know what happened in the year of 2020. Okay. Yeah, we all know what happened in the year of 2020. It wasn't until about last week that I heard from a Barnes and Noble store that they are actually resuming book signings. So there could be a possibility for me to be able to go back on that and, have some conversations with bookstores, all throughout the States, and maybe get some of those book signings back. So there was some hope there, and, hopefully that works out. That's something that I'm trying to do, just to really get the message out there, to get the message out there for people to see that there's hope in film, and people are not alone.
And people are not alone. That's a huge message right there. You have this book out. Tell people how they can learn more about you, learn more about the book, how they can reach out to you.
Website's JesusLovesMovies.com. There's a shop button on there. The book is in all different formats: ebook, audiobook, paperback, obviously.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks again for your time.
Yeah, for sure.
Have you ever wondered why you're drawn to certain movies or certain shows? It was not till I had this conversation with Phil that I realized my own affinity towards certain movies at certain points in my life, and understanding that they have a therapeutic effect just as much as a counseling session or a book or a self-help meeting or a support group. There are so many ways that we can help support ourselves and those we love with things that are around us, but it may take a little change in perspective. So everything regarding Phil is down in the description below. I really appreciate your time because that's the one thing we will not get back. And so I would love it if you left a 5-star review because it will do so much for this podcast and putting it in the hands and ears of those that need it most. Until next time, let's keep building one another up.